The widower didn't flinch when he found a stranger sleeping in his barn. He'd already buried everyone he ever feared losing. But the woman who opened her eyes beneath the hay didn't beg, didn't cry. She just said she was sent to marry him, and by morning, she wore his dead wife's ring. The wind had teeth that night, biting through wool and bone alike. On the ragged edge of a prairie dusk, the widower moved slow, like a man who had nowhere to be but refused to stop. He was tall, wiry, worn thin by grief and work. Each footfall across the dry pasture left a soft puff of dust, rising like ghosts behind him. He'd buried his wife and boy just before the last snow, both taken in 3 days by fever. Since then, he lived like the land, quiet, cracked, and dry inside. He didn't expect anything from the world anymore. Not comfort, not conversation, certainly not companionship. His only ritual now was checking the barn before bed, not out of necessity, but habit. Something about closing that latch made the silence feel final, like drawing curtains in a house that no longer sang. But tonight, something was off. The horses weren't restless. No creaks in the rafters, no shifting wind. Just a heaviness, like a held breath. He eased open the barn door with the edge of his boot and stepped in slow, holding a lantern in one hand and the handle of a rusted spade in the other. The light flickered over tools, hay, and there, in the far stall, tucked behind a bale, was the shape of a person. Curled up tight, blankets pulled over like a makeshift cocoon. His heart didn't race. Instead, something older stirred in his chest, worn caution, the kind that wakes wolves but doesn't let them bark. He walked forward until the lantern's circle of light revealed a face. Dirt smudged the cheeks. Lips chapped, one eye swollen. She didn't flinch, just opened her eyes like someone waking from a dream they were halfway through believing. Her gaze locked on him, unafraid. "You lost?" he asked. She stared for a moment, then slowly shook her head. "Running then?" No answer. He lowered the lantern a bit. "Ain't much here to take, if that's your aim." "I'm not a thief," she said finally. Her voice was dry, cracked like creek bedstone. "I was sent here. This place. It had a name." He blinked, took a step back. "You come by rail?" She nodded. "Was told I'd be met." "Wasn't." "Who told you that?" "A man with papers. Promises. Said the one who wrote the letter needed a wife." She coughed into her elbow, the sound scraping up from her lungs. "Gave me this." From under the blanket, she produced a folded envelope, stained and torn at the edges. His name was on it, his address, but the handwriting wasn't his. He squatted slowly, eyeing her in the lantern light. Whoever wrote that lied. She shrugged with her eyes more than her shoulders. "It got me this far." There was no wedding dress, no trunk of belongings. Just a mud-caked coat, boots worn to leather skin, and eyes that had seen more than they let on. Still, something in the way she looked at him, level, expectant, unafraid, made him feel like he was the one caught trespassing. "I could take you to town. See if they've got room at the mission." "I didn't come for a cot. I came for a name." A silence stretched. The wind howled outside like it had teeth again, wanting to bite through the barn walls. He looked at her long and hard, weighing something deep and slow. "I had a wife. She died 6 months ago." She looked down at her hands, then back up. "So did I long before she ever married." That stopped him. The spade in his hand felt suddenly ridiculous, like a child's toy. He set it down. "I got eggs. Bread, if it ain't gone green." "You hungry?" She didn't answer, just stood and followed him into the house like a ghost obeying gravity. She sat by the fire, steam rising off her coat as he boiled coffee in a dented pot. He watched her from the corner of his eye. She didn't ask questions. She didn't look around like someone casing a place. Just held the cup he gave her and let the heat bloom into her fingers. "You got a name?" he asked. "Plenty," she said. "None that ever stuck." He nodded. "Well, I got one. You want it." She looked up, expression unreadable. "You asking?" "I'm saying there's no one here to stop me." A long pause settled between them, the kind that could break a man's will or bend it just enough. "Why?" He looked into the fire. "Land needs a hand. Bed's cold. And maybe I'm tired of eating in silence." She sipped her coffee. Then again. You gonna hit me? No. Gonna expect things I won't give? No. Another long pause. Then she nodded, once. All right. He reached for the ledger his wife used to keep, a battered book with ink-stained pages and yellowing corners. He flipped to a blank space near the back. She stepped over, peered at the pen in his hand. What name should I write? He asked. She thought a long moment. One that's quiet. One that won't follow me. He nodded and wrote something simple, something common. They signed beneath the flickering light of an old oil lamp. By the time the sky began to lighten, she was asleep in the bed his wife used to warm, and he was back outside, watching the barn door creak in the breeze. The wind had calmed, but something else stirred now, low and uneasy. Something like the start of a storm. Mornings came slow on the prairie, dragging light across the hills like a reluctant promise. The house creaked with the weight of old wood and older silence. She moved through it barefoot, quiet as snowfall, careful not to disturb what hadn't quite settled. The room smelled of dust and coffee grounds, the windows fogged with last night's chill. Her coat still hung near the door, damp from that first night, untouched. He was already outside, chopping kindling with methodical rhythm. She watched from the porch, arms folded across her chest. He hadn't spoken much since the ink dried in the ledger. No vows exchanged, no rings passed between them. Just names, coffee, and a shared roof. He brought in firewood without looking at her, set it down near the hearth. You sleep? He asked. Enough. He nodded, brushing bark dust from his sleeves. Got chores if you're up for 'em. She followed him wordlessly to the chicken coop, where the hens eyed her like she was something feral. She didn't flinch at the pecking or the rusted wire. By midday, she'd gathered eggs, patched a hole in the fence, and gutted 2 trout he'd brought back from a creek. Her hands worked with practiced economy, never lingering, never clumsy. He noticed. He noticed a lot. Like how she never turned her back fully. How she always sat facing the door, left hand never far from her belt, though she hadn't worn the pistol since the wedding. He didn't ask where she kept it. He figured she had more hiding places than he had rooms. The land didn't ask for trust. It just demanded labor. And that they both gave willingly. Inside, the house began to shift around her presence. The extra plate on the table. Her threadbare scarf hanging on the chair. A length of twine she'd braided and wrapped around the handle of the water bucket. Small changes, like stitches closing an old wound too slow to heal. He watched her once as she lit the stove, how she paused to warm her hands over the blue flame, how the light caught the faint scar that traced down the side of her jaw and disappeared behind her ear. She didn't hide it. She didn't explain it either. One afternoon, while he mended fence posts, she wandered into the far room, the one he kept shut. Dust lay thick on the floorboards. The crib sat covered in a canvas sheet, untouched since the day they'd buried the boy. She stared at it for a long time before pulling the sheet back, revealing a tiny wooden horse carved into the rail. Her fingers traced it, slow and reverent. That night, she didn't eat much. He noticed the way her shoulders stayed tense, the quiet tension like a bowstring pulled too long. He said nothing, just poured her coffee, slid the sugar closer. Did he smile? She asked out of nowhere. He looked up from his plate. Not much. He was sick from near the start. She nodded. Babies don't smile when they know they won't stay. He didn't answer. Couldn't. Days passed like slow thunder. Their rhythm grew familiar, even if it wasn't warm. He showed her where the tools were. She showed him how to patch a saddlebag without leather. They moved around each other like shadows that learned not to collide. Then the rider came. Dust rose on the horizon first, then the glint of a silver bit, the dark shape of a man too upright in the saddle to be passing through. She saw him before the widower did, standing at the edge of the porch with one hand pressed lightly to her stomach, the other curling around nothing. The man pulled up near the barn and tipped his hat. Evenin', he said. Didn't expect to see 2 out here. This land used to be quieter. Still is, the widower said, stepping forward, axe handle slung low across his shoulder. The man's eyes slid from him to her. Held a beat too long. She your wife? The widower's voice dropped low. What business is it of yours? None, I reckon. Just thought I seen her before. Guess I was wrong. The man touched his brim, turned his horse, and rode off slow. She didn't speak the rest of the day. That night, she scrubbed her hands raw at the basin, then sat on the floor by the fire, back against a stone. He watched her for a long time. Who was he? No one I cared to see again. You gonna tell me why he looked like he knew you? Maybe one day, she said, when I remember how to sleep through the night. He didn't press, just sat beside her, knees bent, watching the fire paint red across the walls. After a while, she leaned against his shoulder, not from affection, but exhaustion. You ever been in a gunfight? She asked. I've buried men who were. She nodded. I don't run fast anymore. You don't have to. Her eyes slid closed. You still got that ledger? Somewhere. Burn it, she whispered. Names don't mean much if they follow you. He didn't promise he would. But the next morning, the ashes floated out over the field like dust too stubborn to settle. The nights grew longer, heavier. The kind of dark that settled into the bones and whispered things best left buried. The widower rose early and slept late, not from necessity, but from unease. Something hung between them now, not distance exactly, but weight, like a trap set just beneath the floorboards. She sharpened her knife in the evenings, quietly, rhythmically, like she was keeping time with something only she could hear. He didn't ask where she'd found the whetstone. He just listened to the scrape of metal on stone and let it speak for her. The man on horseback hadn't returned, but the land seemed to remember him. Tracks showed up near the creek, boot prints too wide for his own, a horseshoe that left a distinct chip in the mud. She said nothing, but started wearing her gun again, this time openly, as if daring someone to ask why. One morning, he found her out behind the barn, firing into a knot of fence posts with deliberate calm. The way she reloaded, fast, precise, unflinching, told him more than her words ever had. He watched her from a distance, not interrupting, not judging, just seeing her for what she was, someone who had survived too many things that didn't want her to. They didn't speak of the past outright, but pieces of it slipped through. She told him, once, that her real name wasn't the one she gave him, that someone else had owned it, that it had been bartered away for protection, for passage, for silence. He didn't ask who took it. He just offered her space to let it rot. He began sleeping lighter. A rifle stood by the door now. The dog, an old mutt that barely barked, grew alert again, sniffing at windows, pacing the porch. She noticed it too. She always noticed things first. Then, the letter came. Delivered by a traveler who didn't know what he was carrying. Sealed with wax and creased from long miles. No return name. Just a single sheet of heavy paper inside, folded neat. She read it standing near the stove, her hand tightening with each line. He watched her face, not the letter. She didn't say what it contained, only burned it like she had the first. But this time, she didn't watch the ashes. She stared at him instead. They're coming, she said. How many? 3, maybe 4. The man you saw, he's not alone. He waited. Let the silence settle before speaking. What do they want? She hesitated. To finish what I started, or take back what they think they own. She didn't elaborate, and he didn't demand it. Some truths came with edges too sharp to hold bare-handed. They spent the next day readying the homestead, reinforcing shutters, stacking wood near the back door, checking the locks on the cellar hatch. She took inventory of bullets, laid each one out on the table like rosary beads. When she spoke, it was in clipped phrases. All strategy. No fear. She buried a small pouch under the floorboards near the hearth. He asked her what it was. Names, she said. The ones that tried to follow me. He let it lie. That night, he found her sitting outside, staring at the stars. The wind pulled at her coat, hair loose around her collar, like a storm trying to tear her away piece by piece. He sat beside her, careful not to speak too soon. When they come, he said, you don't have to stand alone. She looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. Not quite relief, not quite gratitude. Something older, something closer to disbelief. I never planned to stay, she admitted. I never asked you to. She leaned into him, the side of her arm brushing his. And yet here I am. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a silver ring, dull, dented, once his wife's, now carried out of habit more than memory. If we're going to bleed for this place, he said, you ought to wear something that means you belong to it. She didn't take the ring at first, just stared at it like it might bite. Then, slowly, she held out her hand. He slipped it on. It didn't fit perfectly, but neither did anything in their lives. That wasn't the point. In the distance, a coyote howled, long, mournful, a warning stitched into sound. She stood, checked her pistol. They won't wait for dawn. Then we won't either. As they stepped back into the house, the sky behind them began to darken, not with night, but with storm. A real one this time, cold, crackling, alive with promise. And somewhere out beyond the ridgeline, riders were coming. The kind who didn't knock. The kind who brought the past with them in saddlebags and scars. She met his eyes before they bolted the door. Tell me you've killed before, she said. He gave a grim smile. Not lately, but I remember how. The house went silent after that. The fire burned low. The weapons lay ready. And between them, in that tight, fragile space built from blood and borrowed names, stood something that almost felt like home. The wind shifted again, carrying the faint sound of hooves. They didn't flinch. They just waited, together. They came with the wind, just as she said they would, for riders moving like shadows over the ridge, their figures ghosting through the early fog. No greetings, no bluff, just that slow, deliberate approach of men who'd killed before and didn't plan on talking. He saw them first from a window, leaning slightly to peer between the edge of the curtain and the wooden frame. She didn't move. She was already sitting near the table, gun in hand, spine straight, face calm in that unnatural way that comes when someone's lived through too much to be afraid anymore. They're circling, he said. They'll test the barn first, she replied. Check if we're hiding. She was right. Within minutes, they heard the creak of the barn door, the rustle of hay. One of the men shouted something crude, something about finding her in there, like before. He gripped his rifle tighter, but she touched his hand and shook her head. Wait, she whispered. Make 'em show their teeth first. He nodded. He hated it. Hated the stillness. But he listened. Then came the sound of boots on the porch. One set. A man knocked, twice, sharp and deliberate. Darlin', a voice called. Time's up. Thought maybe you'd be smarter. Find someone cleaner to crawl in with. Guess you want us to do this the hard way. She rose slowly, pistol at her side. She walked to the door without hesitation, then stopped just short of the frame. I'm not your property, she called through the wood. You were bought. I broke the contract with a bullet. The man laughed, low and mean. Only thing you broke was your nerve. Open this door, or I'll burn what's inside. The widower raised his rifle. She didn't open the door. She shot straight through it. The first bullet caught the man mid-laugh, silencing him before he even hit the porch boards. Shouting erupted outside, boots thudding, hooves scrambling, a curse as someone fell. He threw open the door and fired into the smoke, hitting one of the riders square in the shoulder. The man screamed and collapsed into the dirt. Two left. She moved with eerie precision, ducking under the window, eyes sharp. A rider fired, shattering glass above her. Splinters cut her cheek, but she didn't flinch. He returned fire while she slipped out the side entrance. The house groaned with gunfire, with splintering as the last two circled to flank them. She caught one coming around the barn, caught him with a clean shot to the chest. He twitched, then stilled in the mud. Then there was one. The last man didn't flee. He walked into the clearing slow, rifle lowered, gaze locked on her as she stepped out into the open. Rain had started to fall, soft at first, then thick and heavy, soaking them in seconds. Steam curled from her shoulders, from the gun barrel in her hand. You should have stayed gone, she said. The man stared. His left eye was gone, replaced by a puckered scar. His voice was dry gravel. You cost me a lot. I paid in full. You ain't finished paying. She didn't speak again. Neither did he. Not until the moment he reached for his belt, hand sliding toward the revolver at his hip. He was fast, but she was faster. One shot rang out. Then silence. He fell forward into the wet dirt, blood spreading like ink through a letter never sent. She stood over him, breathing hard, shoulders trembling, pistol lowering only after he stopped moving. The widower stepped outside just as the rain began to ease. He took in the bodies, the scorched barn door, the blood that ran like wine through the grooves of the land. Then he looked at her. "You all right?" he asked. "No," she said quietly. "But I'm alive." He walked to her, slow, cautious, like she might vanish if he moved too fast. She didn't flinch when he touched her arm, just leaned into it, eyes fixed on the horizon. They buried the men behind a ridge. No markers, no prayers, just stones stacked and turned, faces to the wind. Days passed. The wounds on her face healed. The rain brought green back to the land. And inside the house, small things began to shift. She started humming once in a while, nothing familiar, just notes that rose and fell like memory. He fixed the broken shutter. She hung a horseshoe above the door, not for luck, but to mark a kind of survival. One morning, he found her near the grave where his wife and son lay. She knelt, her fingers resting on the soil. "I'm not here to replace anyone," she said, without turning. "I know." She stood. "But I'd like to be something." "You are." She smiled then, and it was real. Not soft, not sweet, but true. They rebuilt the barn together. Slower than before, but better. She carved a wooden post herself, shaped it smooth, etched something into the side. "What's that say?" he asked. "Doesn't matter what it says. Only who remembers it." Later that night, he took the ledger from its hiding place and tore out every page that carried someone else's story. Then he handed her a fresh one. "You want to name it?" he asked. She didn't write her old name. She didn't write his. She wrote something new. Something neither of them had belonged to before, but now might. They sat on the porch as the sun set, the light gold and thick and forgiving. The wind was still. For once, no one was coming.